In the latter years of the Second World War, now turning against Germany, several extremely important technical developments took place. All would play a huge part in the post-war world, yet none would be significant for the German war effort. It is the potential these might have played that is interesting. Yet they would all be mutually supporting, and quoting Lenin, everything is connected to everything else. The new Type 21 submarine, V-2 rocket, and the Me-262 jet fighter could together have changed the war, but were all dependent on one another, and the late deployment of one decisively cost the implementation of the other. One major problem with Germany under Hitler was the many self-serving personalities who ran it, and the many scattered production efforts. Only in the latter part were some of the significant programs put under single and determined commands. Albert Speer played a huge part, as did of course General Kammler. And huge strides in development took place in a short time, and one may wonder what might have happened had the war lasted just one more year. Now, one of the promising new developments was the new Type 21 submarine, and the advances was significant, and it saw service after the war also, and it inspired a new post-war generation of submarines. The 21 was the first real submarine designed to primarily operate underwater. It could sail faster underwater than any other, dive faster, it was quieter, and the new hull was hydrodynamic and streamlined. With 3 times as many batteries as any previous U-boats, it could charge its batteries using snorkel only 5 hours. It would travel 17 knots submerged and could thus outrun most surface ships. With a sprint ability as well and a creep motor for silent running. It had 6 torpedo tubes and an electric reloading system and could thus theoretically fire 12 torpedoes in 20 minutes. It had a passive sonar and even a freezer for the food for the crew of 57. Also, it was the first to deploy tethered drones for scanning over the horizon. And also, the construction was finally streamlined for faster assembly. But a very, very large bunker was needed for this production to take place and in safety from Allied bombing. This is where the huge Valentine bunker in Bremen comes in. And given the Allied air power, where the Me-262 was and expected to be in service to protect it. So to the end of producing these new boats, in an assembly line style, this enormous bunker was built. With a second in the planning stage also. It is absolutely massive, 426 meters long, walls of 4.5 meters thick, a roof of reinforced concrete arches, 500,000 cubic meters of cement. It was built by the Todt organization with a planned output of 14 boats every month starting in April 1945, with 13 assembly bays, with an inside dive room to test the hull, whereafter the boats would launch straight into the Weser River. 118 of these boats were produced, but only 2 saw active service during the war. However, after several of these types were put in service with the Russians, Americans, British, and French navies, even the Germans raised one in the 1950s and placed it in service as a research vessel all the way up to 1982. This certainly proved the validity of the design. However, it needed time to work out the kinks, time they did not have. The fast-paced production left many problems to be repaired after assembly. The snorkel was a hydraulic system, it was overly complicated and placed outside the pressure hull. Also, American tests post-war showed that the engines were underpowered, but the post-war time receiving nations had improved many of these issues, as they had time to do so. Despite all these flaws, the U.S. Navy actually took President Truman down to a depth of 440 feet in the German-built sub U-2513 before it was scuttled off the coast of the U.S. The concept of mass production of U-boats began with Otto Merker, an industrial engineer with a background in auto manufacturing. It was envisaged that 8 prefabricated sections would be produced elsewhere and assembled here. These would weigh between 70 and 130 tons each. And on April 19th, the day before Hitler's birthday, the first boat had been assembled and launched using Merker's methods. However, it was not that successful, so the next day it was hauled out of the water and repaired. So these fixes and the problems from the fast assembly began to show itself. In January 1945, there was 90 Type 21s built, 31 in service, yet none operational. The first Type 21 went operational on May 3rd, 1945. I wanted to see this enormous construction project for myself and hear the story of those who were made to build it. For that, we're meeting with a friend of mine, Marcus Meyer, who has done an amazing job putting the Valentine bunker together as a museum and place of remembrance for those who constructed it.
We are at the so-called Bunker Valentin. It's never finished submarine plant, as you will. It's meant to produce Type 21 submarines. So this thing is about 490 meters long, about up to 90 meters in the square, and about 38 meters high. Building this bunker in about 22 months was only possible by using up to 10,000 slave workers from all over Europe and North Africa. We're talking about concentration camp inmates, so-called civil slave workers, POWs from mostly Poland and the Soviet Union, and inmates of a so-called labor correction camp run by the local Gestapo and the local Chamber of Commerce. We are standing in front of the backside of the so-called sluice chamber. That was also never finished, because this is not only the place of the sluice gate, this is the place of a second project planned mainly in December 44, called Valentine II. Valentine II would have had the same size of Valentine I, but a different shape, and it was meant as a storage for the submarine segments. And it's kind of strange, amazing, and crazy to plan a submarine bunker in the same size at that time, where basically everyone knew that this war was lost, and it's only about winning or going down completely. Yeah. And this has to do with not a complete change in mind, but this bunker is kind of rational, because it's calculated to produce the Type 21 as effective as possible, but everything outside is completely irrational. They started to build this place early 43. They did it because they couldn't protect their shipyards anymore. The Allied had control over German airspace, and the Germans thought they could erect a place like this and install a construction site like this. At the same time, the Allied had complete control over the airspace. And one of the most impressive things on this site is that we do not have only a documentation of this place by the Germans. We have it also by the British Naval Intelligence. And the documentation starts right at the same time. So when they started doing the first groundworks, we have the first British air surveillance pictures. And we have this file in Q with a documentation of this place the whole 22 months, with detailed drawings in 3D about this place with marks where the roof is 7 meters and where it is not. So the British Naval Intelligence knew everything about it. They knew the temperature on the ground. They knew what traffic was on the River Weser. It was under complete control. And when the Germans started to finish the roof, it was meant to be 7 meters, because 7 meters wouldn't have been destroyed by even Grand Slams. So they choose a point where they were beginning to bring it up to 7 meters, and they flew one attack. And 2 bombs hit. And that's end of story. And they could have done it from day one. They didn't, because so many resources were used that didn't mean any danger. They were only wasted. And that's the real story of this place. It's not so much the technique, it's not so much the size, it's the rationality on the one side and the irrationality on the other side. So this is a place symbolic for what we now call the total war.
Still see some of the bomb damage on the roof.
We entered about in here. The entrance is not on the map, but that's the idea. So the idea was to bring in. You can see the segments: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, whatever. You bring them through this gate. You put them on wagons. You can see the wagons here, and then you put the boat together, and then you push it through the bunker. 1, 2, 3, and then push it in this direction. 1, back, push again, back, push again, back, and then over there in the sluice gate.
So literally like a little factory. Every section, something would be done to it.
Right. It's like car production. Yes. It's Fordistic, basically.
Well, they did visit Henry Ford and
before
the war.
They were fighting if a German submarine should use an American technique. At the end, they decided what was more effective, and this was the American way.
Yeah, mass production. Hello.
Yeah, mass production, right? Because as I said, they would have worked on as you can see here, 12 boats at the same time.
And that would have,
and they would have shipped out one every 56 hours in the test phase. After that, they thought they need about 48 hours. Delivering the segments and shipping out the submarines under bright daylight was kind of impossible. But Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz thought if Hermann Göring would come up with the Messerschmitt 262, the first real jet planes, these jet planes would protect the airspace above the bunker and above the River Weser to Bremerhaven, and could protect the submarines. But this is if, and the chance that this would have ever happened is quite little. But that's all about this place. It's so much fantasy and pushing away reality and just making up this fanatic idea of we can change the war by wonder weapons. And it was a complete new technique, not tested, no experienced sailors, and not even enough sailors. So the whole idea of producing this Type 21 and hoping to cut the Allied lines through the Atlantic was also just a fantasy. But it was a very effective propaganda thing. And everything was about propaganda in these last 2 years, to make the Germans believe we can change the war and to keep them running.
So the roof on top of the hole you built after?
Yeah, that was built by the Navy just to keep the water out.
That's a very good idea. So is this the original one that from the war or a test?
No.
This is a test.
This is a test, post-war test.
Yeah, they used to be.
Certainly.
And it broke up on impact.
Yeah.
It does give a good idea how massive they are, or were.
Yeah, the thing is, they had to change these Lancaster bombers to get these bombs in the air.
Yeah.
They basically threw out everything that was not needed for flying or navigating, and everything was left was space to carry these bombs.
A little bit like the Doolittle raid.
Fun?
So none of this would ever have been underwater. This was all production halls.
Yes. No water in this part.
And they installed they got the machinery in here, but never got to run. Never produced a single submarine.
No. As far as we know, not even every equipment was installed. And we actually don't know if even one segment has been transported. Because as you could see outside, it wasn't ready. It wasn't finished.
Yeah.
The back side of the sluice chamber wasn't there, and a sluice chamber without a back wall is completely useless.
So this is where the segments would come in.
Yeah, you can see the structure. This is track 1, and this over there is track 2, with the wagons on them. And this is the place where the submarine actually would have been. And everything you can see here is just, it's not fancy, it's not mysterious, it's just what you need to produce a submarine in the way they wanted to produce these Type 21 submarines.
So they would run on carts on tracks that would move
Exactly.
sideways, laterally, and then
Yeah.
into the structure.
Yeah.
Lots of technical tunnels everywhere. I see a hole in the roof.
Yeah, but these holes actually are post-war.
Are they tests
damages.
as well?
Yeah. Most holes in the roof.
So there's a hole in the ground.
Yeah.
Was that the penetration from the hit?
Post-war to blow the whole place up, and this might have been a place where they tried to find out how much explosives they would have needed to kill this place.
Yeah, I see the rebar on the floor. I think that is a wonderful thing that it is still here, and I'll tell you why I think that. I always said there's so much destruction that went on after the war of places, tunnels, factories that were built by slave labor. And what really bothers me sometimes is there are kilometers of tunnels that were built by slave laborers that died there.
Yeah.
And today nobody even knows
Yeah.
what they were building. And nobody even knows they were there. And
Yeah.
if the last thing I did before I died was building some big thing, I want my name on that big thing for the rest of eternity to tell everybody that I was here and this is what I did.
That's actually what we are doing right now. We are doing research on the names of the prisoners, because they were made just numbers. They were not persons anymore, and now it's one of our most important parts of our work to bring back these names, to bring back their biography.
And how many died working here? Do we even know?
We don't know exactly. We think about 1,600.
1,600.
But it's kind of seasonal related, more in
winter, yeah.
But that's what we're doing now. I'm sitting on lists of concentration camp prisoners every day to find out who was it, when did they came, when did they leave, did they die, did they survive, when did they die, because of what did they die. Because that's the real heritage of this place.
Yes.
It's not the technique.
And that over there is where the submarine parts would come in sections.
Exactly. That's the segment gate. You can see the size of the segment gate. And then you have here something like a turntable, where they would have turned the segments to put them on the first line of production. Yeah, we don't know if it's a prisoner or it's a guard, because it's just a footstep, but it's a footstep.
It is.
Yeah.
Now
it's a human remain in this.
Yeah.
Inhuman place. Not only were concentration camp prisoners and the civil workers had their...
So the civilian forced laborers are the ones that were involuntarily transcripted from other countries and sent here.
Yeah, and that was the majority.
So this wasn't even like slave laborers. This was just people that were literally picked up the street somewhere in Poland or...
Yeah, or in France or wherever. Yeah, or German army came and surrounded your factory and then said, okay, every 10th guy on the truck, and then go away. And if you're lucky, someone informed your family.
Yeah. Actually, this is an amazing building.
Yeah.
It just is really terrible to think about how many people that had to pay with their lives for building it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And luckily we have all these pictures. We can prove where they were, what they did. And as I said, we're discovering new documents every day, basically, literally.
At least these are documents the Russians didn't get.
No, these are documents the International Red Cross collected in the former International Tracing Service archives, which is now the AROS archives.
Okay.
And they are digitalizing everything.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, and so you have this database where you can put in prisoner numbers of prisoners or names, and you get lists and informations, and sometimes you get their property, passports, pictures, everything.
However, by 1948, it had become quite clear that the Russians had an interest in the Type 21 and were running over 15 of these, despite only being allocated 4 from the Potsdam Agreement. However, by taking the Danzig shipyard, they had gotten enough to build quite a few of these.
Where the pumps...
Yes, groundwater?
Yeah, groundwater and filling the sluice gate and pumping out water out of the sluice gate. Even of that we have pictures. And this was a post-war playground for the kids from the town.
That I believe.
Yeah, I always meet now old people telling me that they played in here, and I'm always amazed that no one was badly hurt or even died. Because they did so crazy things.
Well,
Kids are kind of protected.
I know, and sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're not stupid. Sometimes.
But they had a game. They went up the roof and shouted, and somebody called the fire brigade. And then the challenge was to stay as long as possible on the roof until the fire guys get on it. And there was a hidden tunnel to slide down. And if you were the last one, you were the big hero.
Of course. You gotta love the games kids play. And it's funny because I remember when I was a kid, you could sort of do stuff like that, and if you got caught, yeah, they'll yell at you a little bit. But that was... How would they actually build this? Where did they start? They started with the basement and the floor, and then they put up scaffolding and forms, or how?
They started with the fundamentals. So they had steel walls. Filled the steel walls with armaments and concrete.
Or the rebar.
The rebar.
Yeah.
And these walls were also on tracks. So they filled them, then they waited until the concrete dried up to a special time or whatever, or consistency, and then they just pushed the wall a little bit further, and then they filled the next square. And they did this in two rows. First layer and then the second layer above, and you can see it because these that's one metal steel part of this wall.
The imprint, yeah.
The imprint. And that's why they reached this huge temple.
It was all about efficiency.
It was all about efficiency. It was not done with wood as before. It was done with metal to reuse the form, basically. And this was a quite new technique from a company in Neustadt an der Weinstraße called Luchterhand. And we met a young boy who worked for Luchterhand, who explained to us how this worked. It was the most important construction site of the German Navy, if not one of the most of the whole war. And you have this special connection between Dönitz and Albert Speer. And Albert Speer was responsible for this thing as much as Dönitz.
Yes.
And so there was no problem to get anything Dönitz wanted on this place moving. You have this close collaboration between the Navy construction department and the construction department of the organization Todt. Albert Speer was head of the organization Todt at that time, and he was responsible for any construction project at that time.
Ooh. So is this groundwater, or is there some canal underground to the ocean, or?
No, it's rain.
It's rain.
And look at this.
Oh wow. A lot of footsteps.
You could see how wet the concrete must have been, because they slipped in and it was sunk in pretty deep.
They must have been in a hurry.
Exactly. You don't know why, it's always this human remains. Just getting an idea that this was actually built by human beings.
Yeah. Yeah, this is. So how deep is this?
This is about 10 meters deep and about 14 to 20 meters high. So you would have had kind of 30 meters of depth to test the boats, to see if water comes in anywhere, and to do a first engine test and battery test and whatever.
So I'm guessing when you would flood this, and then you would have to enter the boat by going up the stairs, and then the boat would be up there.
Yeah, exactly. It's hard to imagine.
It really is. It's
how this place would have looked with actually. I'll tell you in a minute.
so this would have been another turntable. What about this here? What about this hole here?
Maybe what is for the sluice gates,
Oh, yeah.
maybe a small power plant. Actually, we don't know.
Yeah, of course, none of that was installed.
Just some cranes were installed.
Because I could see, what, 5,000 years from now, this is still here, and we're all gone, and the aliens land and go like, what the hell was this? There's that triangle thing in the desert, and you have these big square things in Europe.
Yeah.
Something else.
Yeah.
It'll be this strange planet full of cows. Actually, I heard, well, the last thing that would survive a nuclear war was the cockroaches, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Great. Not even leaving us something we can eat.
Inside about 20, 25. We started right from the scratch. We took over this from the German Navy. There was nothing to welcome visitors, to have there was only a rotten exhibition, basically.
Yeah.
And so me and my colleagues had the opportunity to develop everything you can see now. And that's a huge privilege to do a concept on a place like this.
But you're doing a special project about the laborers that worked here.
One part of our daily work to do research about the former prisoners, because one idea of the Nazis when it comes to prisoners was to take out their personality by just giving them numbers instead of their names. And now we're trying to get back their names by searching for documents, searching for lists. And what's important is that we get calls very often from families, basically from the so-called third generation. And they want to know what happened to my grandpa. I heard he was a prisoner in Germany. And so we have calls from all over Europe about prisoners. Just 2 years ago, I had an email by a lady from Spain who was looking for her uncle. And we did some research, and At the end, we had his name, we had a lot of huge parts of his biography, and we found his wallet, actually, in the so-called Arolsen archives, where a lot of effects of former prisoners are spared. And the idea of the Arolsen archives is to give it back if you can prove that it's belonging of your ancestors. And that's important because we have this huge building that seems to crash any individual. And our goal is to bring back the memory of the individuals against this huge amount of concrete. At a place like this, you can see what happens if basic principles of democracy get crushed. People were imprisoned for any reasons or even for no reasons, and there was no possibility to reclaim their freedom because they were outside the system. They were made outcasts because of their home country, their nationality, their color, their beliefs, and nobody had basic human rights anymore. The prisoners marched on the streets every day. The main crossing was closed for at least an hour every morning and every day. And the Germans in the town had to make a decision. Do I support this? Do I ignore this? Or do I stand up against it? And this is the most important question. If you see something that is definitely not right, what do I do? When do I do it? And which decision do I make? Do I join? Do I resist? Or do I just ignore? And if it comes to the presence, these questions are the most important questions of our presence. To keep up basic human rights for everybody. And this is one of the messages of this place. Everyone has rights. And I thought that was quite clear for everyone. But as you see every day in the news, it's not. And as long as it is not, our work is not done. It's not only about talking about history. It's about making the connections between the history and the present, and to help people to get a view on their presence, and just try to learn something from this, so that the death and the suffering was not for nothing.
But you're absolutely correct. The problem I think we found in the Third Reich was a lot of people were afraid to do anything because, well, they might be marching with the prisoners the next day if they did. And then so they choose to ignore. And I think we see a lot of problems. When I see what's going on, I think we can blame the media for a lot of things, and a lot of the way news and media is being portrayed today is wrong, because they're looking for a sensation every 15 minutes, which means that if you actually have a problem, you're not going to actually be able to tell anybody, so they listen, because they're so used to, oh yeah, this is the sensation of the hour, or the next one, or the next one, and the real problems get ignored. I don't want to hear opinions.
No, I want to hear news to make up my own opinion.
Yes. It's a weird time in history. And actually, I'll be honest, as a historian, it is a scary time of history. Because I think where we're going is not in a good direction on a global scale. It is impressive that this is all rainwater. Yeah, that's true. So all these were lined with water-resistant material, so it wouldn't seep through the cement. This must be original bridge.
Yeah, this is.
Oh. All right. If it's wet, dirty, and dangerous, I'm on board. I mean, all in all, it is still the safest place I've been lately.
Is it?
Yeah, actually it is.
Construction walls.
This is one of the construction. Okay.
Yeah, this was part of a huge, much bigger wall, but you can
Yeah.
Yeah. You can see, I will show you a picture of it, of things like that. That was part of one of these steel
Yeah,
walls.
so they bolt them together.
Yeah.
And then ooh. I think the restoration needs to start really soon, otherwise it won't be around that long. The whole other half is on the other side, was just as big, right?
No, this is 2/3.
2/3.
Yeah.
All right.
And this is where the British tried to blow up the case.
Casemate?
Where you put
Kayak.
ships.
Oh, the dock?
Yeah, the dock, exactly. This was actually destroyed. You can see the dock was ready, but then they put explosives in it, and it was part of this. How can we destroy this thing?
I know. Yeah, and I guess there was vehicles down there when it was less wet. Interesting, no matter where you see, mostly the Americans, of course, wherever they show up, they blow things up after they take it. Or they shoot at it, or even Ibn Amal. I did a couple of episodes from Ibn Amal. They liked me so much, they asked me to come back. And they crawled me inside every one of the turrets, every one of the fighting positions. Awesome. And then we go outside one of the fighting positions in one of the moats, and it's full of holes. And I was like, damn, who shot at this thing? I said, oh, it was after the war. The Americans were using it for target practice. These are the walls as well?
Yeah. You know the story of Helgoland, the island target?
Oh, the Danish island?
Yeah, the German island.
Helgoland.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I don't know. It used to be Danish, didn't it?
Yeah.
We had some wars about that.
Before the World War I, I think.
Yes,
Yeah.
Arguments existed.
Yeah. Helgoland was heavily bombed in the same bombing trial as this, but this was the comparison place. They attacked Helgoland with explosives and this without.
What is in Helgoland?
Nothing. That was the point. You could bomb Helgoland without any.
No bunkers, no pens, no nothing, just bombing it.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's
And
nice.
there were some bunkers, but they called it Project Ruby, and you can download the complete Ruby file on the British Wikipedia page of Bunker Valentin. It's quite fantastic. It's fascinating because they have all these pictures of the roof and everything else.
It's really interesting to see how small the people they look in the distance down there.
Band, and they have party too. That was amazing.
So were there going to be dividing walls here, or?
What? No.
This was just
kind of ladder, or just but that's where the water will stop.
all the way up there.
Yeah.
With
And you can see the constructions coming out of the wall that would carry the cranes.
Oh yeah. So the water, this would literally have been filled up with water.
Yeah, up to that, where the wall ends.
So that means that those up there would have been, the top floors would have been above water. That would be a working area up there.
Yeah.
That's just like a dive tower.
Yeah.
Which is a strange experience to crawl up to dive down. So this is the British demolition attempt after.
This was actually liberated by the British and then taken over by the US about 1 or 2 weeks after that. Because they changed, the Americans wanted to get a harbor, and this was Bremerhaven, and so the British gave up this place and handed it over to the US forces.
So is that wall new?
Which one?
White one.
Yeah, this one ahead is new. This is to separate the damaged part from the not damaged part and to get a kind of controlled environment in the storage part.
What damaged part? We can fix this with a little paint and some cement. Come on.
Post-war Navy. They really changed it. They changed the ground, they painted the walls, but the roof is original. It was only painted. But that's the roof. Water is coming through, and it's between this latex color and the concrete. So we have a huge problem with falling rocks.
Oh, goody. Oh, well.
Now we have to check the roof. The principle of these is that we place them where they had been taken over.
Yes.
And so this is this.
This is literally where this was.
Yeah. And you can see this part of the wall
Yeah.
isn't finished. You can see all this metal coming out to get the connection between the first and the second layer. You have the concrete pipes where it was pumped into the metal walls, and in the center you have the concentration camp prisoners. And you have prisoners of war, as you can see here.
Yeah.
And this may have been a German kind of worker or something, but the concentration camp, the prisoners and the forced laborers were present everywhere. And then sometimes you can see guards way in the back. That's very small, because this was meant as a technical documentation. The organization top was so proud on this construction site that they engaged this local photographer to get basically a series of pictures that show how amazing the work went on this stage. And the prisoners are just parts of this production process.
Of course.
And for us it's important they are not staged. They do what they do. We only have some pictures where the prisoners actually are staged, and you can see that.
Yeah.
In these pictures, they do what they do. They get sometimes irritated by a photographer, and you see this look into the camera.
Yeah. Do we know who he is?
No, we don't know.
That's a shame.
Yeah, it's hard to get names of people on these pictures. We have one or two. Grand Admiral Dönitz visiting the construction site.
So is this the wall where? So this was here.
Yeah, this was inside. Exactly. And this is this guy is Edo Miners, who was responsible for two huge building projects. This one and a bunker called Hornisse in the city center.
This is not what you usually see when you see German quality.
No, that was kind of in a kind of hurry or something. There are parts missing.
Yes, there is.
Because the walls are now for 450, and the idea was to build them in 7 meters. So a lot of works weren't done. And we have pictures showing how the bunker would have looked in the post-war area, because they wanted to present it as a kind of Roman imperial temple with columns and eagles above the wall, the gates.
They were actually going to show it off, make it a showpiece.
Yeah, you couldn't destroy it, and they thought one day they would have peace, and you need to give them a look fitting in a peacetime. And that was not only Valentine, they had plans for all bunkers over the Reich, for the post-war area, which is completely crazy.
Well, I mean, if you win the war and you have all these sitting around, you may as well make them look nice. I mean, there's not...
Exactly.
In Denmark, they put little seahorses on them.
Yeah, I know.
Which is actually, which is very cute, but...
And funny...
When the two bombs hit,
Yeah.
they exploded halfway in the... People were sheltering inside, but they weren't killed, from what I understand.
Yeah, because they had a time fuse. So they dropped the bomb on the roof, and an hour later they detonated. And an hour later everyone was not in their shelters anymore, and only the Germans had this kind of shelter. The forced laborers were unprotected.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of casualties after this attack, mostly prisoners.
The question was, and have been ever since, was the Type 21 a war-winning wonder weapon? During trials after the war, testing by the British and Americans showed that there were problems. The speed was not quite as advertised, the telescopic snorkel could only be used at 6 knots, and different torpedo types that was carried, while very sophisticated, could not all be fired under the same circumstances, some being homing torpedoes. The engines were not powerful enough, and the superchargers also had significant problems, and in some cases these were dismantled by the Germans themselves. You can, on average, subtract 1/3 of all the U-boat's stats from the time of the war's expectation. However, if one looks at the initiatives and the possibilities of this boat's features, had the German Navy had been given time to work these out, it might have been a significant threat. But given the parallel Allied countermeasures, it's doubtful it would have been a single-handed game changer. The same could be said for the Me-262, which was a game changer, but also its kinks had not been worked out fully. But again, given a little more time, it would have made a significant difference in the war. And after the war, we would see the lineage of these weapons and just how significant they would become with proper development and time for testing. Over the next month, I will take you through other German special weapons, their sites, locations, deployment, and their actual performance and potentials.